Welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene. My latest build is the Scalextric Ford GT. I chose the Ford GT because it comes with a slim can motor that offers a significant performance advantage over the motors in the other Scalextric GT cars. The question is, with this build, will I be able to make that horsepower result in faster lap times? In our club, you're allowed to change the guide and the rear tires and wheels on the Scalextric GT cars. I'm going to be using a Slotting Plus guide and NSR tires and wheels. As with any Scalextric build, the first thing I do is strip the chassis. Once everything is removed from the chassis, the first thing I do is work on the body and getting the body to float properly on the chassis. On the Ford GT, there were two obvious areas that I needed to remove material to allow the body to float. In the front, I removed the two tabs that hold the body in place. I also removed the holder for the front LED lights since we won't be racing this car at night. The biggest area that keeps this body from floating are the air ducts on the side of the body. You can see the area here in silver where I'm going to remove material. You can see the material that I've removed from the chassis on the right compared to the stock on the left. Here you can see the amount of material I've moved from the side ducts. Again, the modified on the right, the stock on the left. Inside the body, you'll need to remove the brackets that push the bushings in place on the chassis. Once we get the car done, we'll glue the bushings in place so this won't matter. This picture is an exaggeration, but I did remove a bit of material from the exhaust in silver on the chassis, so there's a slight gap between the exhaust and the body when the body's mounted on the chassis. When I test fit the body on the chassis, I found that one of the driver's arms was resting on top of the motor. I ground off a bit of his arm to allow the body to have clearance. On the rear wing assembly, which actually attaches between the body and the chassis, I opened up the large hole you see here to allow the rear wing assembly to float as well. I also had to trim just a little bit where the wing is inserted in the body. The next step is to modify the door that's used to hold the wiring harness. I removed the two tabs in the front, as well as grinding the tabs on the wiring harness holder and removing it entirely. Once everything is removed from the door, reinstall it in the chassis, and use a bit of superglue to hold it in place. The next step in this build are the wheels and tires. In the front, I'm using stock wheels and tires. In the rear, I'm using NSR Super Grips and NSR Air Wheels. Mounting the NSR wheels on the stock axle requires that you remove the knurling that holds the original plastic wheels in place. Be very cautious when you do this, because it doesn't take much to remove the knurling, and if you remove too much, the wheel will wobble on the axle and you'll have to replace the axle. I mounted and trued the rear wheel assembly and attached it into the chassis. Once that was done, I trued the front tires until the chassis sits level on the test block. The next thing to do is install the CG adapter, which will allow us to mount the Slotting Plus guide. Make sure the adapter sits level with the chassis and then glue it in place. The CG adapter and the Slotting Plus guide were a rather tight fit in this chassis, so I had to do a lot of sanding and test fitting to get the guide nice and free. Using the test block, I determined that I needed two washers to get the front wheels to sit where I wanted them, just barely off the track. The chassis is now ready, and it's time to rewire the car. The wire is run directly from the guide and routed underneath the axle and through the two brackets that used to hold the door in place. The motor needs to be glued in place to prevent it from rotating during acceleration or braking. I also glue the bushings in place at this time. The front tires use my standard nail polish technique to make them as slippery as possible. There's a link above to show you how to do this. The next thing I do is remove the magnet from the car. When I do track testing, I will be adding lead in 3 places on the chassis. The chassis is done, so now it's time to reinforce the body. You need to glue the wing where the supports attach to the diffuser and where the wing supports attach to the wing itself. On the body itself, I use super glue to reinforce the mirror mounts and the headlight covers. It's finally time to attach the body to the chassis. The threads on the stock body mounting screws can hinder body movement. Because of this, I use Slotting Plus partially threaded screws that eliminate that problem. The Scalextric Ford GT looks awesome and is ready to race. Hopefully it'll look great in the winner's circle as well. Thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene.